Hi, this is Professor Favors. This is the lecture for American literature. This is an overview of all of the different periods, themes, some historical context, as well as ideals and core values of the period. Again, this lecture is going to introduce specific literary periods, those themes that were inherent within the periods, specific authors under each of the literary periods, and then those ideals. There's the American ideal. There is the literary expression ideal. So this is an overview of the lecture. This lecture is subject to fair use, so I am using and referring to specific literary periods, authors, etc. So it is subject to commentary, criticism, research, teaching, and scholarship. So let's look at the periods of American literature just in outline form. So there's the pre-colonization. We have the colonial and early national period. This is between the 17th century and early 19th century. 17th century means 1600 to 1699. Then we have the Romantic period, which is 1830 to 1870. Realism and Nationalism, 1870 to 1910. The Modernist period, 1910 to 1945. And then, of course, the Contemporary period, 1945 to the present. Remember, there's a difference between the dates for the literary periods versus historical periods. So if you were taking a history class, the periods, the date ranges might change a little bit, not too much. So understand that literary history, in terms of periods, and regular historical periods will differ by a few years. So here's a quick historical note. The American Civil War happens during the Romantic period in terms of the literary period, and that's between April 12th, 1861 and April 9th, 1865. And then the Emancipation Proclamation is signed on January 1, 1863. So here are some of the traditional themes that you will find in this course, explored within this course within the literary works. So there's this idea of loss of innocence and coming of age. You'll see this in certain literary works. There's also the concept of survival of the fittest. The American dream sort of comes later, but there is alienation and isolation that comes right before it. Then we have political and societal rankings. So as some of the colonists came to America, they still maintain sort of like their social hierarchies. And so you will see that explored within the works, as well as during slavery, of course, you had hierarchy between master and slave. Then we have literary works that explored the author's relationship with nature or the author's relationship with science. Later, in terms of somewhere at the end of the modernist period to the contemporary period, we read of Black experiences. Then there's this push for gender and sexuality, and then, of course, freedom of expression. So these are your traditional themes that are explored within the literary works within this class. All right, let's look at realism and naturalism. So that's 1870 to 1910. We have a historical note here. And it's more or less influential because the American Civil War happens prior to it, but April 12th, 1861 to April 9th, 1865. So whatever is going on within the American Civil War is going to have an impact on realist and naturalist authors. So realism and naturalism focus on the following writing strategies. Writers depicted the way the world really was and all its flaws and goodness. So it's not a fictional account. It is actually what you see. You write what you see. A lot of times you'll have authors, well-established authors, respond to a question from the audience, what should I write about? and that author would tell the person, write what you know. So this is an example of that. Naturalists intensify the realist um, perceptions, and then writing focus on the human cost of the Civil War. So remember, again, the American Civil War happens prior to the dates that you see here, 1870 to 1910, but they're having an impact on the literary writing. Okay, so emphasize this particular period, emphasize the experiences of the middle and working classes in cities. So now we have a not only a working class, but we have a middle class. And so it documented truth, and then it depicted writing as an aesthetic experience. So it's painting a picture of everyday life. So here are your realism and naturalism authors, 1870 to 1910. The list is not exhaustive. Do remember that. So we have Mark Twain, Theodore Dreiser. This is when you see more of the novels coming into play. Frank Norris, depicting urban life, war. So now we have an urban life, right? We moved from colonial settler, let's say slave, colonial settler, master, middle working class, middle class, poor. We have all these different classes of society, and now we are moving into exploring that within literary writing, adding fuel to the fire concerning capitalism and murder. So then we have also Paul Laurence Dunbar, and he's talking about writing in black dialect and having some popularity with white audiences. And then Henry James, The Portrait of a Lady, presents reality. The most important aspect of this particular period is that this period emphasized vagrant life as better and being civilized as boring. So let's look at the analysis of everything we've just gone through. So understanding the author's purpose for writing. So here are your key ideas. Just a quick summation. Authors consider themselves as outsiders. They write from this perspective. For example, Emily Dickinson lives as an unmarried woman, writing in seclusion and isolation, while Walt Whitman lived as a vagabond in search of community. American literary tradition is a derivative. American literary tradition derives much of its sentiment from British literary tradition or English literature. The first colonists and publication companies modeled writing on what was published overseas in Great Britain. They wrote about their experiences beginning in the 1600s. Technological improvements increased print publication. The first transcontinental railroad aided in creating a culture of print, which further expanded the boundaries of American literature. This further inspired the perpetuation of the literary movement. Okay. Last of the key ideas, definition of literary culture assumes a larger role in global politics. This suggests an inclusive discussion about how America is depicted in novels, short stories, fictional works, and poetry. However, F.O. Matheson's work titled The American Renaissance points out the neglected voices of women, African Americans, and Native Americans. So that means there's a contradiction. There's a movement from exclusive to inclusive, but you still have people feeling neglected, meaning that they still feel like that they are excluded. Advocate, Advocacy for the abolitionist movement creates a solution for the neglected voices. So the Romantic period creates a space, an urgent need to pursue new voices and rapid change. Freedom of expression is indicated in Whitman and Dickinson's changes to American poetry from patriotic and historical to free verse that lacks the inhibitors of rhyme and meter, which is mostly characterized in English literature. So there's a movement from heavy dependence on English literature or British literature to now uh, more freedom um, in American literature. Change inspires new voices and new freedoms. Various authors write using different American dialects, but also inspire divisions into different periods, values, sentiments, and belief systems from the perspective of writing and literature. initial exclusive nature of writing transitions to rejection of ideals to expressions of freedom. So that rejection of ideals is the status quo, whatever the status quo at that time. So if the writings uh, um, advocated for maintaining slavery, which would be the status quo, then new writings or new literary authors reject those ideals, those core values, and say, no, we need to push for abolition. So that means the writing is going to express freedom. All right. So this is the end of the lecture, and these are the sources consulted. This particular PowerPoint will be uploaded to the classroom as well as my website too. Thank you very much for listening.